There are some issues in South Korea too. How does Trump deal with North Korea? Will we still be a strong front against that with South Korea? And then, as Consul General mentioned earlier, Korea being the biggest investor in the United States, it could potentially have, especially on like green energy technology, could have some impacts on that, or at least make some Korean investors think twice.
Right. Well, I think the two macro issues in terms of our foreign policy is going to be trade, and it's going to be, let's just call it international engagement. There is obviously Biden is much more of a team builder, unlike Trump. But what's going on right now in the country is there's a spending fatigue, and Trump has bought into that, not bought into it, he's using it as a weapon. Once again, you know, if you're having problems with inflation, if there's a pothole in your front porch or yard, why in the world are we giving money elsewhere? And it's an exaggeration how much money that we have. I always make some long shot predictions. I think what will happen is he's going to say, we're spending too much money. I'm not going to spend that much money in Ukraine. Europe, you got to spend more. Europeans credit, they've gone up to the 2%, and they should have, and Trump credit for giving them that. So I think what will happen is Trump will probably make some kind of deal with Putin, give him some territory, and say, Europe, you go along with that, and at least you get something because we're pulling out. And that's going to be an awful, awful choice for Europeans. But I think that Putin, you know, what he's losing 1,000, folks a day, so I mean, Putin wants a way out there. Anyway, they're going to find a way to give Putin something, and Europe is going to be an awful pill to have to take, but I think they're going to have to take it.
I agree with Bart's analysis of that. In the debate last night, when you talk about spending weariness on the part of the American people, and Trump playing that card, when he came, he said every time Zelensky comes to the United States, he comes wanting, with his hand out, wanting another check of billions of dollars. And so he's definitely making that because there is a weariness at the amount of money and the competitive nature of sending.
And there's not a perceived sense of success. They don't see Ukraine winning.
Yeah. And the other, again, I will call it a success that he's had, is getting the Europeans and NATO to increase to that 2% level. I think he's going to press Korea, Japan, others. I'm sure they, to increase. Japan has already done that, and increase in the sense of us pulling back. So I think those are some dynamics you're going to see. As Tim said, he'll be very pro Netanyahu. Where that takes us, nobody really knows, and the impact that's going to have in the Mideast. And then the other foreign policy really is trade. I mean, that is to a great extent of foreign policy. And he's already made it very clear that he's going to have large across-the-board taxes, with even more so on China. So, do we lose our China coalition, which is could be a real problem for, again, this or a victory for the autocrats, increasing their sphere and making dents in our sort of leadership in sphere in the world, and what collateral damage if there is a trade war, as Trump has said. Trade wars are great because we can win them, and so he is once again trying to move. The way I view him dealing in trade is, and one of the reasons that he doesn't like the EU, when I say the EU, the partnership of those countries, as well as a partnership in Asia, is they have more power. He wants to deal with you one-on-one. In the U.S. economy, versus even the German economy trumps, where U.S. economy and European economy is pretty much equal. Try to take on the Asian countries in the same way. And you almost just have to, bear it and grin, but say, I'm going to get back at you sometime. And I think we really put ourselves up in jeopardy in terms of our leadership and losing a sort of a moral high ground and knowing that there'll be some point where we need them and they're not going to be there.
That's sobering. Well, I'd like to open it up to the audience here for questions. If you have questions, please state your name, and then they'll bring a microphone over to you. Yes, the gentleman there.
Hi, my name is Sean. I don't think the comps with previous debates where incumbents did badly are appropriate because in each case they were facing someone who was in practice after a primary, which would explain it. The fact is Trump had in practice, so Biden's loss is even worse. Trump spoke more mistruths, but Biden wasn't blameless in this regard, especially saying that no U.S. troops had died on his watch in combat. And lastly, I really liked last night's format. I found it very content-rich. So 2 quick questions. Do you think this will be the format going forward in future campaigns? And if Trump does win what he would consider his 3rd term, can we look forward to a Kim Jong-un visit to the White House? Thank you.
Well, I won't take all of that, but I'll take the part about I liking the format. I did think it was a good format. It allowed it to be more substantive than previous debates that were conducted by the networks. And so I don't think there'll be another debate this year. I think the September debate will probably never happen. But in future debates, yeah, I think they'll look at a format similar to this, and that's a good way to go. You think we're going to have a visit for?
I would take issue with Trump did not have prior debates for practice. Every rally is a practice for him. It's the same thing. Bam, bam, bam. All he did was regurgitate all of the grievances that he does at every rally. I don't think he said anything that's new. So he was well prepared. I agree with Tim in terms of the next debate. You might remember during the primary, Trump said, why should I debate? I'm winning. And so the question really is going to be, there has to be some, the bottom has to fall out somehow. If he thinks he's winning and that he only has something to lose, he's not going to do the next debate.
By the way, I think not having a studio audience really worked to Trump's benefit. It wasn't like his volume level, everything was more modulated than when he had like a rally atmosphere and a big crowd in the studio audience. Sorry, I call it.
No, I agree.
So it's almost like to Biden, be careful what you wish for, you may get it, right? Another question? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is James. I just have a question regarding between the 2 candidates. Who do you think is going to be better for in terms of advancing U.S. technology, or does that even matter, especially in terms of how technology can be sort of weaponized or utilized in sort of like changing political leverage? Thank you.
Well, one of the great accomplishments of President Biden, I think, was the CHIPS Act and funding a domestic semiconductor industry. Desperately needed. We're entirely too reliant upon our friends in Taiwan and South Korea, and many of those companies now are building their fabs here in the U.S. I think that was, give credit, I think that was a great bipartisan achievement of President Biden, and will put us in, over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, in a much stronger position.
An overview, and I don't remember how many there is now. I think there's 7 or 8 billion people in the world, and half those make less than $2 a day. So you either have to compete on wages or innovation. That's where your standing life is. We know where we want to be. The great advantage for the United States, really since World War II particularly, has been the investment that the federal government has made into innovation and research. And there is a cycle. You have to invest in research, which creates innovation. Innovation then creates new products and jobs. And that is the reason You know, we don't have the great economy because we have more people. We're marginally maybe better educated in some ways, but it's been our, I think, investment in science and research. It's not all Republicans, and I was chairman of the Science and Space Committee, so I saw it pretty firsthand. Many Republicans feel like that, and I think Trump feels this way, that the federal government should not be investing in research, not in experience. You know, if there's something worth discovering, then the private sector will do it, and they'll make money on it. But I think what most folks in the private sector will tell you is they have to have that basic research, and then they'll take it and do something with it. They're not going to take, in essence, shareholder money to do experiments. And again, there's a fear with some Republicans that you're picking winners and losers. And so somewhere there is that fine line between investing in research, but not necessarily doing winners and losers, but turning it over to the private sector. I'm afraid that this administration would rather give, I know this is like a talking point, but would rather give a tax cut to a corporation and think that would incentivize them, rather than use some of that same money to invest in National Science Foundation or elsewhere in early stage research. So I think that we have a real likelihood to fall back in terms of that research. I think the question right now is there's a lot of money in the pipeline. And there's a lot both in terms of dollars and in terms of tax incentives. How much of that can get out? How much of that will stay? And so, in essence, can you get your crop in the field before the bad, or get it in and out of the field before the bad weather comes?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Thomas, and I'll reference a topic that came up briefly last night, which I was a little surprised to hear, and this is the topic of nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. We heard Trump make reference to the JCPOA, which he pulled out of, and of course, when he was in office, he teased wanting to give, of course, nuclear weapons to South Korea, which had very intense reactions. Although, of course, yes, we say Americans don't care, or the American public doesn't care about foreign policy, this could be a very large issue on the geopolitical scale, especially with a report by the CIA in February that Iran, for instance, is just 10 days away from having enough fissile material to create a nuclear weapon. That being the case, do we think that Trump will continue with the same vein of the comments he made, for instance, both at his rallies, where he would allow non-proliferation to continue? Do we think if Biden were to win, we'd see a stronger stance on non-proliferation, especially with Iran, or maybe even disarmament? What are our takes on that between the two candidates?
I'll just quickly say that I think when allies overseas have questions about American credibility and our ability to have confidence in our coming to their defense and sharing our nuclear umbrella, that's when those sorts of desires to get your own weapon arise. And there's some talk about South Korea withdrawing from the NPT now. So, yeah, I think it's a big concern. And also, just from a public opinion standpoint, preventing countries from getting nuclear weapons is always high on the American agenda. But it's not always at the top of the news cycle. So, like right now, North Korea is seen as a lesser threat because it's been quiet, at least in our news cycle, when they're in a missile test and then we don't have all these other things going on, then it's a higher concern. But if it were raised, to their attention, that might be something they
And then there's the Putin visit to North Korea.
Yeah.
And how that might play out with North Korea's desire to increase its capabilities, right?
Well, on the proliferation question, I think there's really two different tracks. One is, Tina points out, as we pull back from our leadership, then there is more of particularly Europe and elsewhere, there is the feeling that they need to have this weapon, they can't count on us. The other, which I think is maybe a little, which is a bigger and more troubling issue, is, as I said earlier, the world simply is dividing up between autocratic autocratic societies and democratic societies. And a part of, and the autocratic societies by and large are more developing, their economies aren't doing as well, and they want to catch up. We have been sort of, the big cheese and all of this. And so, and part of it's because we've had most of nuclear weapons. I think that you're going to see these autocrats encourage more nuclear weapons to offset what we have, because again, there is this big divide. So it is not a good track, I don't think, that we're going on if the proliferation is a concern of yours.
Do we have any questions from our online audience?
Hi, yes, so a few of the questions have been answered already in this discussion. There's one question from Audrey Greenwood from Reliable Agreement Management, and she asked if each of the panelists could directly address the U.S. population. What main point would you want to get across pertaining to the global repercussions that the election outcome may have, and why that matters? So if you have any message to the U.S. public on that.
So I think it's the global repercussions of the election, and what would you say if you were speaking to an audience of Americans? Is that?
I think like what the stakes are for the
Right.
world, I guess.
Right.
For this election.
We've kind of covered a lot of that, I think, and the message, it's not a singular message. The impact of a Trump presidency on foreign affairs is going to vary depending upon the region of the world. There's a general, yes, it'll be less engaged internationally. I think that's a given. But as far as what the impact on NATO will be, Ukraine, the Middle East, Taiwan, South Korea, there's really different messages, I think. But the big difference, but to this extent, I think Trump has had a point that Biden and the Biden policies have communicated less strength than what Trump would project. Yes, lack of predictability, uncertainty and lack of predictability can work to your benefit in certain circumstances. I think it was the case with Ronald Reagan oftentimes. So I don't know what my singular message to the American people regarding the foreign policy implications of the Trump administration. I'm not sure. I'm not a big fan of the Biden administration and what they've done in regard to Iran, in regard to North Korea, the issues of proliferation. I don't think it's necessarily a great track record. I certainly support what he's done in the Ukraine. I think that's the best investment of military dollars we could possibly make in holding back an offensive from a brutal dictator in Russia, and what that might mean for the future if he's not stopped in Ukraine. But generally speaking, I don't think it's projected strength I like to see in the American government.
Or let me just follow up, because you've mentioned autocratic governments, and there is a perception, maybe fair, maybe not, and you can maybe answer that former President Trump seems to feel almost more comfortable with some of those autocratic leaders. Would a Trump White House be more amenable to dealing with them or friendlier to them, or is that just some sort of misguided assumption that the Democrats are putting out?
Let me answer the first question, and I'll get the second question. What would be my message? My message to the rest of the world is don't give on us. Don't give up on us. That would be my first message. We've come back before, and we'll come back again. My message at home would be somewhat following up on what again, there is this autocratic world, and there is the democratic world. That's just sort of vague terms. What does that mean? China is leading is an economic and military threat to us, and it's trying to pull together the rest of the world to help bring us down in those regards. And so the message and internally is that, yes, I know you're tired of spending money, but we can't, by us working with our, fellow, camaraderie countries, Korea and others, that we don't have to spend it all. We're going to have to take on China one way or the other. The question is, are we going to have allies that are going to help us with that? Then, I guess, going to your question, I think Trump is naive. I think he, in terms of foreign policy, I think that he thinks that because of our economy, because, that we can bully the rest of the world. I think he believes that and can be successful. And that's not, I don't think, a successful foreign policy.
Other questions? Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Jiwon Kim. I really thought that your interpretation of how well each presidential candidates do in their campaigns in the next 4 months would affect the congressional elections. And my question is, how much would that impact the congressional elections and whether or not that will actually bring a change in terms of which party will have control over the government? And in that case, how will each government and each party maneuver with their own internal divisions that are happening within their own party lines?
So it brings it back to Congress.
Yeah, well, I think, as I said before, the Senate outcome on the elections really tilt to the favor of Republicans. There are, according to most prognosticators, 3 toss-up races right now on the Senate and 4 that lean Democrat, but could be competitive. So it's going to be, it could be 50-50, it could be a Republican majority, but probably the Democrats aren't going to hold the Senate. I think it would be difficult for them to do that. If it's a Trump presidency, you've got then a check in the Senate. You're going to have a check anyway because of the filibuster rule, and Democrats may be glad that Republicans resisted doing away with the filibuster because it protects the rights of the minority in the Senate, and it will be a check on excessive executive power. The House, most believe the House has a better chance of going Republican, but it's really close. It's like 51-49 if you took the betting odds, if you took Nate Silver and his projections. There are like 22 competitive seats out of 435. I mean, maybe a few more competitive, but there are 22 toss-up seats, and there are 11 Republican and 11 Democrats. So much depends upon what happens at head of the ticket, how does the presidency go, and what kind of turnout, how's it going to affect the turnout in these various congressional districts. And to me, it's a jump ball, a toss a coin. It could, the House particularly could go either way, but it's could be very close.
Let me just jump in and ask a question that follows up. How different would a Trump presidency be with a Republican House and Republican Senate versus the Democrats holding on to at least one chamber of Congress?
All the difference in the world. I mean, if Republicans control all 3 branches, they control the House, the Senate, and the executive branch, and he comes in with something like a mandate, and we've already seen how Republicans kind of fall in line. I don't think there's going to be a lot of resistance. So you've got to overcome the filibuster of the Senate, and that's going to be the last safeguard against President Trump being able to get legislatively whatever he wants. But the difference in having a divided government and having both chambers controlled by the same party is enormous.
Is there a bigger word than enormous? Is there one extraordinary? Or let me take another step forward. If there is some bit of divided government, then there's going to have to be some level of cooperation, and there'll be a lot of sort of stagnation. In essence, President Trump, that we're talking about now, would govern by executive order. And so, to a great extent, he's going to say, screw you, Congress, I'm just going to do it. And there's some limitations of what he can do there. And the Senate, at some point, we'll say you're getting into my departments. But here's the big deal. There's something called reconciliation. Reconciliation happens, a couple times times a year, and if you do it right, you can get it a third year. So what is that? Reconciliation. What reconciliation is, it's a tool to be able to pass, in essence, an enormous amount of legislation without dealing with the filibuster. All you have to do is have a majority in the House and a majority in the Senate. And as I understand, Trump was an amateur last time. He didn't even think he was going to win. So they got off to sort of a slow start. His team, if you want to call it that, already have 100 executive orders put together. They'll have a full agenda of undoing as much climate change, undoing everything they could possibly do, the taxes. They'll put them into this reconciliation. It'll be the biggest probably bill that the world has ever seen in terms of the dollars. It will, and so they will have this ability at least twice a year to package. Now, the only sort of good news there, if you get, when I say good news, unless you want to see complete, fruit basket turnover, is that the Republicans, will probably have, if they have the majority in the House, it'll be single digits. And then, somebody could be sick one day, somebody was kidding the other day and said that Speaker Johnson is now making the Republicans, when they cross the street, have to hold hands. He can't afford to lose anybody. And it's going to be much like that the next time. At best, the Republicans will have, I think they have two, but it could be just one, just the vice president in the Senate. So they're going to have to overcome some of their internal differences to be able to use the filibuster. But I would not want to be a holdout Republican. There was just one or two of me, and Trump is beating on me, and Marjorie Taylor Greene is beating on me. So that will moderate a little bit, but you're going to see some enormous changes with reconciliation.
So we are just about out of time. I'm just going to ask one quick final wrap-up question that we could probably each speak on for hours, but I'm going to ask you to do it with just seconds. Is regardless of who wins, how strong is our democracy and how will it handle the outcome?
It's a great question. I have great confidence in our democracy, and I believe our institutions will hold. And I'm an optimist regarding the future of America and the institutions of democracy that have kept us safe from autocrats in the past. And I think they'll hold to continue.
Dina?
Oh, no.
I'm trying to think how to answer
Okay,
this question. I saw this question and I was thinking you would ask me.
Winston Churchill famously said that the Americans always do the right thing after they tried everything else. And so that would allow me to share some optimism with Tim. Also, I guess, as a Democrat and as, I guess, a part of the so-called Washington elite, it's, we feel like that Trump is the one that's undermining, democracy. And so, but I was shocked the other day, the New York Times had a poll that, about the same question, about undermining democracy. And it's almost equal amount of the country thinks that Joe Biden is as much of a threat to democracy as Donald Trump. What in the world? How do you, think that? And once again, it goes back to, I think, this media, to the social media that is portraying Biden as weaponizing the Justice Department and the judicial system to go after Trump, even though his own son was convicted in that system, even though Trump said he is going to do it. So that the signal there is what we know, but we are a we know we're a divided country. We are a deeply, deeply divided country when almost an equal amount of folks, think that Joe Biden was as much of a threat to democracy as Donald Trump. You may think that's prejudicial on my part, but it's extraordinary when I saw the results of that poll. So I think there is a real problem. I don't think revolution is in the works, but I think that we are a divided country, and it's going to be hard to come to consensus. And when you can't come to consensus, it's hard to lead. And you have this autocratic group that wants us brought down. Their odds go up.
I want to be as optimistic as, I aspire to be as optimistic as Tim, but I'll say I am shaken by January 6th, what happened. That people are carrying that with them when they think about the elections now. I'm disappointed in the I think, politicization of the Supreme Court and how, like some of their rulings, like the Dobbs ruling, is against the majority public opinion. I'm not alone. A majority of Americans have no confidence in the Supreme Court anymore either, but I do feel shaken about our institutions, and the first Trump administration had a lot of moderate, seasoned professionals in the cabinet. They didn't stay very long, but they were cycling through, and this time around he could have his pick of people who are like-minded and won't say no. And if January 6th happened, is he going to leave? I mean, this is extreme, right? But I have questions about it, but I hope Tim is right, and we are as a resilient country. Also, I wanted to second your point that our alliances and our partnerships with countries around the world are very resilient. So I hope our democracy is strong enough to withstand that.
Let me add one quick thing. In 2020, Al Gore lost by the smallest possible margin with I won't say enormous, but with many legitimate inconsistencies there. It would have been easy for him to have said, I'm going to challenge this. He said, in essence, the voters spoke, God bless you. George Bush, I behind you. Donald Trump still doesn't admit that he lost the election. I mean,
And they had asked him 3 times last night, would he support the elections if it turns out to not be him? And even when he said, yes, it was, if it's something, and if it's a good election.
Yeah, and apparently there is a choir made up of some individuals that were in the insurrection. And so I think, and Donald Trump's talking about having whatever there's a name for him, the January 6th choir or something, like sing at, his inauguration. What are you thinking?
Yeah, it's
Well, look, we are out of time. As I like to often tell my students, I prefer to remain optimistic, but I am worried. And so, but look, I want to thank our terrific panelists for their insights and observations and thoughts and perspectives and all the information they offered to put all of our election issues and questions and future in context. So please, thank you.
Thanks to the audience for putting up with us.
Very rich and timely conversation. I'm also an optimist. We still have 3 branches of government. We still have the Constitution, and I don't think that will go away in the next few years. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you also enjoyed this program. And please consider membership in the Career Society. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we need broad membership to continue our work. Thank you.